Imagine a sickness with no fever, no cough, and no cure. A contagion of pure, exhausting motion. In the summer of 1518, the ancient city of Strasbourg became a stage for a surreal nightmare as people collapsed and died from sheer exhaustion, victims of a relentless, fatal jig. Tonight, we try to unlock the darkest medical mystery of the Renaissance, the dancing plague, and the reasons why hundreds of souls were compelled to dance until their hearts exploded. It began without warning. A lone woman stepped into the narrow streets of Strasbourg's old quarter and started to dance. There was no music, no celebration, just the sound of her shoes striking the cobblestone, rhythmically, endlessly. Her name was Frau Trophäa. For hours she moved without pause, her body trembling, her eyes glassy, her movements mechanical, as though pulled by invisible strings. By the second day, neighbors gathered, whispering prayers and superstitions. By the third, her feet were bleeding, yet she could not stop. And by the week's end, 30 more had joined her. Men, women, even children, spinning, jerking, collapsing, and rising again to dance. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with the stench of sweat and fear. Within a month, the number had swelled into the hundreds. Strasbourg's streets, once filled with the chatter of merchants and the toll of church bells, now echoed with the frantic rhythm of footsteps, a symphony of suffering. Witnesses spoke of faces twisted in agony, of bodies moving as if possessed, of mothers clutching their children only to be pulled back into the spiral of motion. Some danced themselves into heart failure. Others convulsed mid-step, dying where they stood, still moving as the final spasms shook their limbs. Authorities were baffled. Doctors blamed hot blood and celestial misalignment. Priests warned of divine punishment. Others whispered the name of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics, and feared that his curse had descended upon the city. But none could explain why. Why would hundreds abandon control of their own bodies? Why would they dance through pain, through tears, through death itself? And what force, natural, psychological, or divine, could turn joy into a weapon? 5 centuries later, the question still haunts historians, doctors, and theologians alike. Was it mass hysteria born from hunger and despair? A fungal poison twisting minds into chaos, or something far more disturbing, the eruption of faith and madness from deep within the collective soul of humanity? This is not merely the story of a bizarre historical anomaly. It is a story about us, about the limits of the mind, the breaking point of belief, and the terror of losing control of one's own body. Because in Strasbourg, in the blistering heat of 1518, joy became torment. Music became death. And the city learned that sometimes the most frightening plagues are the ones that come not from outside, but from within.
It began in a single alley, a narrow vein in the heart of Strasbourg, where the cobblestones still held the heat of July sun. Frau Trophäa, an ordinary woman of no remarkable history, stepped out from her small timber-framed home and began to move. At first, it seemed like a dance of joy, a gentle rhythm, a sway of relief perhaps, after long days of toil. But soon her gestures grew violent, her arms flailing as though her body were rebelling against her will. Hours passed. Neighbors peered through wooden shutters. Whispers rose, "Is she possessed? Bewitched?" Her husband pleaded, but she could not hear him. She moved until her legs buckled, then forced herself upright again. Her feet bled through her shoes, leaving a trail of crimson across the street. By nightfall, her body trembled uncontrollably, yet the rhythm continued, relentless, invisible, consuming her. In the days that followed, the city watched in stunned fascination as others joined her. It was as if her torment had become contagious. 30, then 50, then more. Men and women from every corner of Strasbourg, bakers, merchants, beggars, mothers, all taken by the same unholy rhythm. They danced in the marketplace, beside the cathedral walls, along the banks of the Rhine. Some screamed for mercy between gasps for air. Others laughed hysterically, as if caught between ecstasy and agony. Their bodies became instruments of something unseen, flailing, jerking, spinning through exhaustion. Eyewitnesses described the horror in letters and chronicles. They moved day and night, without food, without rest. Their limbs twisted as though seized by demons. And still they danced. At first, the city's leaders did nothing. They believed it would pass, a spectacle, a madness that would burn itself out. But it didn't. The dancers filled every public square. The noise of their feet echoed against the cathedral towers, mingling with prayers and screams. Doctors were summoned. They examined the afflicted and found no signs of fever or infection. Their conclusion: too much hot blood. The cure, they said, was not stillness, but more dancing. The city's council ordered the dancers moved to the Guildhall, where musicians were hired to play. They believed the rhythm must be purged, the madness exhausted. But the music only deepened the frenzy. As the fiddles played and drums thundered, the dancers spun faster, until one by one, they fell. Some rose again. Others never did. No one could explain what was happening. And in that confusion, a sense of dread began to spread faster than the dancing itself. What if this was not sickness, but punishment? In a world ruled by faith and fear, where famine and disease were seen as divine wrath, the people of Strasbourg began to search their souls. Confessionals overflowed. Priests warned that the city's sins had called forth the curse of Saint Vitus, the saint said to punish blasphemers with uncontrollable motion. And as the bells of Strasbourg tolled over the Rhine, hundreds kept dancing, to music no one else could hear. To understand why the people of Strasbourg danced themselves to death, we must look beyond the spectacle, into the suffocating weight of the world they lived in. The year was 1518. Strasbourg, a thriving city of the Holy Roman Empire, stood at the crossroads of trade and faith, and at the edge of collapse. Famine had gripped the land. Crops had failed. Bread prices had soared beyond reach. Mothers buried children starved to the bone, fathers traded heirlooms for a loaf. The Rhine had turned sluggish and brown, its trade routes slowing under the burden of hunger. And over it all hung a deeper sickness, fear. The people feared disease, demons, and divine wrath in equal measure. The Black Death was still a living memory, its ghost haunting every prayer. The Church's authority was being questioned by voices like Martin Luther's, whose Reformation was tearing through Europe like wildfire. Heaven and hell no longer felt distant, they hovered just above the rooftops, judging every act, every sin. In this crucible of anxiety, the body became both battleground and confession. When the first dancers began to move uncontrollably, the city saw it not as illness, but as divine spectacle. A warning. A punishment. The records describe a populace on edge. Priests urged repentance. Flagellants paraded through the streets, whipping their backs raw in desperate prayer. Alms were offered, processions held, candles lit before images of Saint Vitus, patron of dancers, protector against curses. But the plague did not cease. It intensified. Hundreds now filled the streets, moving as though a single will guided them. The rhythm became the heartbeat of the city, relentless, feverish, echoing from dawn to dusk. The sound of tambourines mixed with the cries of exhaustion, the scrape of shoes against stone, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. And amid the chaos, something even more terrifying began to happen. The watchers started to feel it too. Eyewitnesses wrote of people who came merely to look, only to begin swaying, tapping, stepping, and finally joining the dance. It was as though the plague could leap from one mind to another, transmitted through sight, sound, and shared fear. Doctors, unable to understand it, turned to astrology. They blamed the alignment of Saturn and Jupiter, claiming their conjunction had heated the blood of the people. Priests called for processions, but even their prayers seemed powerless. Strasbourg became a city possessed, a place where the line between faith and madness blurred into one endless rhythm. The wealthy fled to the countryside. The poor had nowhere to run. They danced. At night, the streets glowed with torchlight as shadows twirled against the cathedral walls. At dawn, the bells tolled for the dead. And still, the dance continued. No one could sleep. No one could think. The city, already broken by hunger and guilt, was now consumed by something far darker, a sickness of the soul. By late July, the city of Strasbourg had become a theater of horror. The streets pulsed not with music, but with the sound of suffering, hundreds of feet striking stone in relentless rhythm. The dancers had no leader, no pattern, no reason. Only motion. Day and night, they moved, drenched in sweat, eyes glazed, mouths open in silent screams. Their clothes clung to their bodies, soaked through. The cobblestones grew slick with blood from torn soles. Witnesses described men collapsing mid-step, their hearts bursting under the strain. Women twitched violently as their bodies gave out, only to be lifted and forced to move again, as though something inside refused to die. Some cried to heaven. Others cursed God. Many said they could feel a presence, an invisible force driving them on, compelling their limbs to move even as their minds begged for stillness. The air grew thick with decay. Food rotted in the markets. The city smelled of sweat, fear, and death. Physicians and priests alike recoiled, unable to help. Those who tried to restrain the dancers found them unresponsive, their bodies trembling with unnatural energy. Chronicles speak of people collapsing from exhaustion, suffering heart attacks and strokes. Some danced until they lost consciousness, their bodies convulsing in final spasms before lying still. Yet others, moments later, would stir again, rise, and rejoin the dance. The spectacle became unbearable. Even the city's musicians, hired to play in the misguided hope that music would exhaust the dancers, began to falter. Their songs no longer felt human. The melodies turned into screams. Every street became an altar of agony. Children watched their parents collapse. Husbands held their wives as they trembled, whispering prayers to saints who no longer answered. As the weeks dragged on, the line between life and death blurred. Some dancers were buried where they fell. Others disappeared, their bodies carried away at dawn, their names forgotten. But the rhythm, that terrible rhythm, echoed on. One chronicler wrote, "They danced until their bones cracked, until blood ran from their ears, until the bells of the cathedral tolled for them, and still they did not stop." No plague had ever been so cruel, so senseless. It offered no rash, no fever, no mercy. Just movement, endless, involuntary, lethal. And through it all, Strasbourg watched in silence. The clergy saw punishment. The doctors saw madness. But beneath both, the people saw something far worse, a reflection of their own despair. Because the truth that no one dared speak was this: perhaps the dancers were not sick at all. Perhaps they were the embodiment of everything the city had tried to suppress: the hunger, the guilt, the grief. The plague did not come from outside. It erupted from within. Centuries have passed, and yet the question still burns. What really happened in Strasbourg in the summer of 1518? Was it madness? Poison? Punishment? Or something even stranger, a contagion of belief itself? Scholars, doctors, and theologians have wrestled with this mystery for 500 years, each theory offering a fragment of the truth, but none the full picture. The first theory: mass psychogenic illness. Some believe the dancing plague was not a disease of the body, but of the mind, a collective breakdown of reason. Mass psychogenic illness, they call it. The people of Strasbourg were starving, terrified, and spiritually cornered. Famine had taken their crops, the church warned of hellfire, death was everywhere. In such conditions, the human mind seeks release, an outlet for its unbearable tension. So when Frau Trophia began to dance, her act became a spark in dry grass. Her neighbors, already teetering on the edge, saw her movements as divine, or demonic. Their fear, and faith, spread faster than any pathogen. One body moved, then another, and another. Not because of contagion in the air, but contagion in the imagination. A city, desperate for meaning, began to embody its own fear. The second theory: ergot poisoning. Others looked to science, to a small, deadly fungus. Ergot, a mold that grows on damp rye, produces a toxin known to cause hallucinations, convulsions, and spasms. Consumed unknowingly in bread, it could twist the human nervous system into chaos. Ergot poisoning can make the body writhe and jerk uncontrollably. It can flood the mind with visions, angels, demons, the dead, and make the victim believe they are dancing in holy ecstasy or torment. Historians point to similar outbreaks across medieval Europe, where entire communities convulsed under ergot's hallucinogenic grip. Yet skeptics argue that ergot also constricts blood flow, making long bouts of motion nearly impossible. Could those suffering from it really dance for days? The theory answers much, but not all. The third theory: the curse of Saint Vitus. And then there is the spiritual explanation, one that the people of Strasbourg themselves believed. In their minds, this was no illness or poison. It was the curse of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics. Legend said that those who angered him would be seized by uncontrollable movement, condemned to dance until forgiveness was granted. In the heart of Strasbourg stood an altar dedicated to him. When the plague erupted, priests led the afflicted to a nearby shrine, hoping his mercy would end their torment. Some returned cured. Others never returned at all. To the faithful, this was not madness. It was divine wrath, the body turned into a message from heaven. The fourth theory: social stress and religious ecstasy. Modern psychologists have offered yet another perspective, one more haunting than any curse. They suggest the dance was a social exorcism. A city suffocating under guilt, hunger, and spiritual fear found its only release in motion. The dancing became a language, a physical scream against unbearable suffering. For days, these bodies were both prisoners and prophets, expressing what no one could say aloud. It was, in essence, a rebellion of flesh against faith. And yet, none of these theories alone can explain it. The truth may lie somewhere between mind and matter, between heaven and hallucination. Perhaps the dancing plague was not one thing, but everything: fear, faith, famine, and suggestion, fusing into a single, unstoppable storm. A mirror held up to humanity's most fragile state, when belief becomes biology, and emotion becomes epidemic. By August, Strasbourg had surrendered to the madness. The city's leaders, desperate for control, gathered in the council hall beneath flickering candlelight and the smell of sweat-soaked parchment. Doctors, priests, and magistrates argued over the cause, over what could stop it. And then came the strangest prescription ever written in the history of medicine. Let them dance. Physicians believed the dancers were afflicted by overheated blood, that their bodies must purge it through motion. So the council ordered a cure through exhaustion. They cleared the grain market, built wooden stages in the town square, and, in a decision that bordered on insanity, hired musicians to play day and night. Drums, fiddles, pipes, and tambourines filled the city air. Bands played frenzied rhythms as hundreds of pale, trembling bodies swayed and spun beneath the summer sun. It was a grotesque spectacle, a festival of death masquerading as healing. The musicians, paid in silver, played through tears. Many wrote later that their melodies were drowned out by screams, by sobs, by the sound of collapsing bodies striking wood. The city had become an open-air tomb, music echoing over the dying. Some accounts describe people begging the musicians to stop, to let silence return. Others said the dancers demanded more, as if silence itself had become unbearable. The rhythm grew wild. Women tore at their clothes, their hair matted with sweat. Men gasped for air, faces purple, veins bulging at the neck. The line between body and soul dissolved into one endless, punishing movement. Those too weak to continue were dragged away to the city's hospitals, where nuns prayed over them, their voices trembling. Some woke days later, their muscles rigid, their minds hollow. Others never woke at all. As the death toll rose, the council's confidence shattered. The musicians were dismissed. The stages dismantled. The cure had failed, and made the plague worse. The church intervened once more. The remaining dancers were gathered, their bodies limp, their minds fractured, and sent on pilgrimage to the shrine of Saint Vitus in Saverne. There, barefoot and broken, they were led in prayer. They washed in holy waters, received blessings, and lay in silence for the first time in weeks. It was here, in that stillness, that the dance began to fade. Slowly, the trembling stopped. The rhythm that had consumed the city began to die. But Strasbourg would never be the same. Its streets were haunted by memory, by echoes of drums and the soft, ghostly shuffle of unseen feet. And then, as suddenly as it began, the music stopped. By late September, the dancing plague of Strasbourg had burned itself out. The streets that once thundered with the rhythm of countless feet now lay silent. Only the faint echo of memory remained, a whisper of motion in a city too afraid to move. The survivors were carried home, broken in body and spirit. Their feet were torn to ribbons, their joints swollen, their faces pale as parchment. Some slept for days, haunted by nightmares of endless motion. In the weeks that followed, life returned, but never quite as before. Markets reopened, the cathedral bells tolled again, yet a new kind of silence lingered, the kind that fills a room where something unspeakable has occurred. Mothers whispered warnings to their children, "Do not dance in the streets." Men crossed themselves when they heard a drum. The people avoided the square after dark. The council ordered new regulations on gatherings, fearing the plague might return. Pilgrimages to the shrine of Saint Vitus were banned. Music in public was restricted. Joy itself had become dangerous. In the years that followed, the event slipped from conversation, then from memory, until it became a ghost in history, half believed, half denied. Yet, for those who lived through it, the silence that followed was the most terrifying part of all. Because in that silence, they could still feel it. A faint twitch in the muscle. A whisper beneath the skin. As if the dance had never truly ended, only retreated, waiting for fear and faith to awaken it again. 500 years have passed, yet the echoes of Strasbourg's cursed dance have never truly faded. It remains one of history's most chilling riddles, a moment when hundreds of ordinary people surrendered control of their bodies, and no one could say why. The chroniclers of the time called it a visitation from God. Later physicians labeled it a disorder of the mind. But beneath the theories, one truth remains. The dancing plague was not merely an event, it was a mirror. A mirror reflecting the fragility of the human soul when faith, fear, and despair collide. In the centuries that followed, smaller outbreaks appeared across Europe, in Cologne, in Zurich, in the lowlands of the Rhine. Each time, people moved as though compelled by unseen hands, each time leaving behind the same confusion, the same terror. Historians now see these dance manias as symptoms of a deeper sickness. The collapse of certainty in an age that was losing its balance between body and spirit. The Renaissance promised reason, art, and discovery. But for those who still lived in hunger and superstition, the soul remained a battlefield. The dancers of Strasbourg were not lunatics. They were human beings pushed past the limits of endurance. Their motion was the language of crisis, a primal scream made flesh. And in that sense, their story is not confined to the 16th century. Because even today, the dance continues, though we no longer call it that. We see it in the restless movements of a world caught between anxiety and distraction. In the crowds that move as one in panic, in protest, in frenzy. In the modern plagues that infect not the body, but the mind, fear spreading through screens, through voices, through belief. Psychologists now speak of collective behavior, moral panic, mass delusion. But to the eye of history, it is all the same choreography, the same rhythm of desperation that once pulsed beneath the bells of Strasbourg. And when we strip away the centuries, the lesson remains painfully simple. When fear grips a community, when the body becomes the last place left to express pain, even the impossible can happen. The people of Strasbourg didn't just dance because they were sick. They danced because they had no other way to be heard. Their bodies told the story their voices could not, a story of hunger, guilt, longing, and surrender. And when that story ended, silence fell like judgment. Night falls over Strasbourg once more. 5 centuries have passed, but if you walk the cobbled streets in silence, when the wind sweeps through the alleys and the bells toll from the cathedral tower, you can almost hear it, faint, distant, like the rhythm of a heartbeat beneath the earth. The sound of feet. The ghost of motion. The echo of a dance that should never have been. The dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the most unsettling mysteries in all of human history, because it was never truly about disease. It was about the breaking point of the human spirit. About what happens when faith becomes fear, when fear becomes movement, and when movement becomes death. No virus was found. No poison proved. No sin absolved. Only the endless, unanswered question. What power could make hundreds of people dance themselves to death? Perhaps it was madness, but not of the individual kind. Perhaps it was the madness of an entire age. A world where famine, guilt, and superstition merged into something the human body could no longer contain. And so, the body spoke, in rhythm, in agony, in surrender. We like to believe such things could never happen again. That we are wiser now, safer, saner. But history whispers otherwise. For even today, we dance to forces we do not understand, to the pressures of society, the rhythms of fear, the music of survival. We scroll, we shout, we move endlessly, driven by unseen hands, unseen anxieties. The stage has changed, but the melody remains. And perhaps that is the true terror of Strasbourg's story, not that it happened once, but that it never truly ended. When the last dancer fell in 1518, the music did not die. It simply went silent, waiting. Waiting for another moment of despair. Another crisis of faith. Another crowd ready to lose control. And in that silence between heartbeats, between belief and breakdown, between the sacred and the profane, the music still lingers. Because sometimes, the dance is not a choice. Sometimes, it is the body remembering what the mind cannot bear to say.